We will now present three small additional tools that are also included in the Hyperdoc application. The first one is the file browser. As you can see, this is a very small tool, but it can be very useful to explore the content of a MATLAB file or an HDF5 file. This tool is especially helpful when the software is not able to automatically detect where the data cube, the wavelengths, or the metadata are stored inside your file. In such cases, the file browser allows you to manually inspect the internal structure of the file. For example, if you want to indicate where the wavelengths are stored, you can browse the file content here, select the correct dataset, and then click on the wavelength button down here. You can do the same thing to indicate where the data cube is located and where the metadata are stored. Finally, you can specify the dimension order of the wavelengths in the data cube. This option tells the software whether the wavelength dimension is the first dimension or the last dimension of the array. By default, the wavelength dimension is assumed to be the last one. Once everything is correctly set, you simply validate the configuration. And that's it for this small file browser tool. Note that when working with MATLAB files that rely on specific MATLAB libraries, our software may not be able to show some hidden part like the data cube. Let's continue with the metadata tool. This tool appears by default in the left panel. We can now close the file browser. The visualization part of this metadata tool is also used, as we saw, in the data visualization tool, but here it also allows you to edit metadata. This can be especially useful when you load a new cube directly from your camera and you want to add or modify metadata. Here we will load a file exported from an hyperspectral camera. As you can see, there is a lot of information about the parameters of the acquisition, but generally no information about what is actually in the scene. We can visualize it by sending this cube to the visualization tool. You can see that this is a mock-up created in the laboratory for our project. In this case, we may want to add more descriptive information. Let's add a new metadatum. Click on Add or Remove Metadata. For example, we can create a new field called Cube Info. Here you can define the data type. In this case, we choose a string value. We can then write, for example, that this cube is a mock-up with different inks, and we add it. Now we can see that the new Cube Info metadata has been added. If some metadata are not useful for your workflow, you can also remove them. Once removed, it disappears from the list. At this stage, all changes are still local. They are not propagated to the rest of the application until you click on Send All Metadata Modifications to the cube. Each metadata entry can also be edited individually. For example, I modify this value here and validate the change. If I come back to it, you can see that the value has been updated. If you modify a metadata field but try to leave without validating, the software will ask whether you want to discard the changes. If you discard them, the original value is restored. If at any point you want to undo all edits, you can click on Reset Metadatum. This restores the actual metadatum to their original state before editing. You can also generate metadata automatically, but you should be careful. Some metadata fields may be overwritten. Some fields are read-only. Others can be replaced. You have two options. You can generate metadata from scratch, meaning you manually add new fields, or you can copy metadata from another cube. Let's look at the From Scratch option. Here, the tool proposes a set of basic metadata fields commonly used in the application. You can simply check which ones you want to keep and uncheck those you do not need. Some metadata fields are already present in the cube and cannot be removed. Once generated, you may notice that some fields appear in red. These metadata are not editable manually. When you are done editing, click on Send All Metadata Modifications. This validates all changes and writes them back to the cube. From that moment on, the updated metadata are available to all other tools that use this cube. And that's it for the metadata tool. Let's now present the illumination tool, which is the last tool of this application. You can open it by clicking on the icon with the colored light bulb. As with the other tools, you can also send a cube directly from the cube list. But note that this tool can only be used if the spectral information of your cube covered the whole visible range. When a cube is loaded, you may see a warning message if the cube is very large. Illumination simulation can be computationally expensive, so in this case, it is recommended to first extract a mini cube and perform your tests on a smaller region. Let's now load a small cube into the illumination tool. The first parameter is the illuminant. This represents the light source used to illuminate the document, such as D65, which corresponds to standard daylight, or other predefined illuminants. Changing the illuminant allows you to simulate how the document would appear under different lighting conditions. The next parameter is gamma correction. Gamma controls the nonlinear response between intensity values and displayed brightness. The chromatic adaptation degree, noted here as D, controls how strongly the colors are adapted to the selected illuminant. Once the parameters are set, click on Compute RGB Image. The RGB rendering is then computed and displayed in the viewer. You can immediately see how changing each parameter affects the color rendering of the document. If you want to compare different configurations, you can click on the plus button on the right. This opens a second simulation window, where you can use different illuminants or parameters side by side. This makes it easy to visually compare multiple illumination hypotheses. When you are satisfied with the result, you can save the simulated image. That's it for the illumination tool. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.